Al, why don't you kick it off?
Thank you, Marty, and thank you for inviting me to participate again. And I really enjoy these meetings. And since last year when I first started participating, I've learned so much. So by way of introduction, my name is Al Dampier. I have a doctorate in pharmacy as training. Left that world a long time ago, serial entrepreneur with investments in genomics and actually linguistics. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, but nevertheless, and I tend to work with companies in the seed rounds and early stage rounds as they develop, although I've worked with Fortune 10 companies as well. And so with that, let's turn it over to the panelists. And if you would, give us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what brings you here today. Who would like to kick us off? Sam, you're first on my screen, so let's go with you.
All right, good morning. My name is Sam Prokop. I'm an attorney shareholder at Gunster. So similar to Milton, I think we've got a similar corporate line of business that we work in. I do anything from startups for businesses all the way to sales. So I like the business side of law, and about 70% of my practice is focused on healthcare.
Thank you, Sam. Joan, you're next on my list.
Hi there, good morning. Thank you for having me. I am Joan Fallon. I'm the CEO of a biotech company called Curemark. And our lead drug candidate, which we've taken through clinical trials, is for autism. We plan to file later this year with the FDA. And we're looking at crossover round money now for potential IPO.
Thank you, Joan. And Linda.
Okay, thank you, Al, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this forum. I'm Linda Martin, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Mission Cure Capital. MCC is an impact investing company that is speeding the development of effective therapies for chronic pancreatitis. We fund commercially promising therapeutic research and development projects and companies. I am not a doctor or a scientist. I am a serial entrepreneur as well and a business builder, spending over 30 years launching and growing cell phone companies with over 15 successful exits. But I am now fully committed and passionate about the chronic pancreatitis space, as I am the mother of a daughter with chronic pancreatitis.
Don't let her kid you, she knows the science as well. Nothing like fashion. Sinclair.
Thanks, Al. My name is Sinclair Dunlop. I'm managing partner of Epidarex Capital. We're a transatlantic specialist life science venture fund focused on early stage drugs and devices. We are company builders, typically the first money into a deal we're usually a seed investor in a university spin-out. We're very focused on what we call emerging research hubs or under-ventured regions where you have world-class science, but a lack of scalable specialist risk capital locally. Florida is a great focus for us at the moment. We're about to announce our first Florida investment in a very exciting med tech company that was invented in Florida. We have several family office LPs that are generalist investors that are looking for a specialist manager to source diversification and co-invest opportunities.
Thank you, Sinclair. Chip, with the nice hairstyle today. Chip, would you like to introduce yourself?
Chip, you're on mute.
Trying to unmute it. I actually am not part of your panel.
I didn't think you were, but
I'm running the next one, but Marty told me I'm supposed to click in and listen to everything, so I'm doing
okay. I'm missing one. And
Chip,
Suzanne, is anyone filling in for Gennaro? I don't see him here. Okay, I think that's got everybody. So let's jump into the questions then. Thank you all for your introductions, and I'm glad to be here with you. So we all know COVID has had a serious impact on the world. It's here to stay, whether we like it or not, mask coming on or mask coming off. Where do you see the investment opportunities? We have about 10 minutes to discuss that. So who would like to kick that off? Sinclair, you're about to make an investment in Florida. Why don't you kick that one off for us?
Sure, delighted to. I think one of the most interesting features of what we've all lived through in the last year has been the acceleration of innovation, necessity being the mother of invention, as we all know. But what's most interesting is that the acceleration of innovation driven by COVID is actually going to have impact across many other disease areas. So it's not necessarily innovation and investment opportunities in infectious disease, which historically has had a mixed reputation in terms of return potential. But the core technology underpinning some of these vaccines that are being developed remarkably rapidly has relevance to many other diseases. So what we're seeing in mRNA vaccines, for example, is very relevant to many other diseases. So it's actually a very exciting time where, as I say, the acceleration of innovation is going to create investment opportunities across the board. What's also exciting is that those opportunities are coming earlier. The rapidity of innovation is faster, and regulatory approval in many cases on an emergency basis has been quicker. It also, as people like Linda are experts in, they know that the repurposing of existing drugs towards COVID or COVID-related disease is also an area of exciting development. So you're seeing new opportunities in early innovation, and also the other big change in the market is that exits are occurring from a venture point of view. Exits are occurring earlier. So you have trade sales where big pharma or big medtech in some cases is actually acquiring earlier. They have outsourced their R&D to a large extent. You've also got very healthy public markets. So the IPO world for life science, whether it be drug development or new medtech, is also very healthy. So there are several new windows of opportunity to make competitive returns at the earlier end of the investment cycle. And that's again driven by the regulatory context too, where the good old days of having to wait for a drug to prove efficacy in what they would call a phase 2A or 2B stage of the 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, you're actually seeing exits as early as phase 1. We have a respiratory portfolio company working in cystic fibrosis that we exited in Q4 to a top 10 global pharma acquirer. And that company had only just entered phase 1 safety trial. But the science underpinning that innovation was sufficiently novel, commercially relevant to multiple diseases. So the idea of a platform opportunity rather than a single product, a one-trick pony, single shot on goal. If you have a platform innovation that has relevance to multiple diseases, that is obviously very interesting. And so we're seeing in a COVID context an acceleration of these platforms that have relevance to not just infectious disease, but oncology in particular. Again, back to mRNA, you see a lot of mRNA work that's very relevant to cancer drug development. So that there's a lot of silver linings that have come out of this pandemic that I think is an acceleration of innovation, an opportunity to make more competitive returns quicker, and a possible slight relaxation of the regulatory environment, but still with the health warning, as we've seen very recently with J&J and other vaccines. You can't approach life science investing without a sober acknowledgement of just how challenging the regulatory environment can be, which I think strengthens the argument for a diversification approach and possibly working with specialist managers.
And Sinclair, as a follow-up, when you approach these investments, are you thinking about early exits in mind when you're doing the investing, or are you more typical in your approach?
We are. I mean, I think, we have a couple of corporate, aside from our family office investors in the fund, we also have a couple of corporate strategics we have 2 top 10 pharmaceutical companies as investors in our fund, and they're looking for early visibility, sourcing from the top research schools. Whereas there are young, does UF have a couple of PhD rock star scientists doing something very, very novel, accessing them. And our model allows early access to many of the top schools with whom we've had close working relationships for 20 years. If you're going to find the so-called mad scientist and he or she is still in the lab, you've got to go really early. And you've got to work closely with these academic founders to shape, not just source, but you've got to shape. It's a very hands-on approach. Some of our better exits have been where we've invested a lot of value-add support around first-time entrepreneurs, first-time academics. And the exit can, in those situations, come early. So we are doubling down on that model where big pharma, big medtech acquires, including in that respiratory field example, when the opportunity is it's just going into the clinic, and you've actually got some examples of preclinical exits. So you're getting a return on your initial investment very early and much earlier than would have been the case 10 years ago.
Thank you, Sinclair. And I'm going to put you on the spot with one more question, then I want to go to Sam. And you sort of answered this in what you were saying, but I'm going to draw it out you in a little more detail and put you on the spot. What area or a couple of areas would you say are the best early exit possibilities right now?
It's hard to avoid oncology. I mean, for two reasons. You've got such rapid and impressive, successful innovation, whether it be in some of the hematological cancers, leukemia, for example. You're seeing massive with immuno-onc, fourth generation CAR T innovation. Cancer, it's such a large market, and there's such accelerating innovation. There's still massive amounts of unmet need. The disease models are well proven in the sense of we know how to run clinical trials to get different cancer drug candidates approved. So for us, 40% of our portfolio is cancer and cancer related, and that's not going to change.
And the regulatory is certainly a little different there as well,
Right.
as you alluded.
Because those disease models are familiar to the regulators, we know how to get a cancer drug through.
Certainly. Yeah, and certainly Linda and Joan would like to talk more about early exits in autism and pancreatitis for sure. Sam, from a legal perspective, what are you seeing post-COVID?
You know, we're seeing a lot of consolidation on the hospital end. I think some recent statistics that I read said acquisitions are down by about 40%, but what we're seeing are different types of joint venture type relationships. And we're also seeing emerging new areas. And I think to Sinclair's point, you know, COVID has brought attention and acceleration to a lot of new areas. So a lot of what I'm seeing is of an interest in the pharmaceutical industry or investment opportunities in biotechnology. I think at first investors were a little bit nervous and maybe unfamiliar, or thought, oh my goodness, there's so many regulations surrounding this that they were unfamiliar with. And now, you know, that we see these vaccines pushing through in the FDA process, I think people are getting a little more exposure to that and getting comfortable with it. Telehealth is a huge area where we're seeing interest. And I think one of the areas with COVID are actually two that are going to be more prevalent. We're seeing payers cover more in the mental health side and substance abuse side. And that's also being paired with telehealth type treatment. So I think as you see payers covering more of these types of services, you're going to see a lot more people interested in, you know, in areas and investment opportunities, consolidation. I think you're going to see a lot of companies come into the forefront, and I think we can thank COVID for accelerating that.
I just want to just jump in here real quickly. Do you think that some of this, I mean, Los Angeles mayor just announced that they're kind of putting out some wellness into their budget for city management in the next year? And I know it's a little bit amusing, but at the same time, I mean, do you think that's going to go a ways in the mental health aspect? I mean, obviously, there's a crisis that's been going on in cities for years, ever since Reagan kind of shut down a lot of the mental hospitals back in the 80s, right? So maybe that money is coming back. Any thoughts on that, Sam?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Marty. What we're seeing a lot of, again, is the payers, there's attention and focus on this. And I think COVID is going to really bring to the forefront these issues. I mean, we have people who may not have sought mental health treatment that are seeking it now. I think the circumstances that have brought about by COVID and isolation and restrictions and, you know, losses that we have, whether it's death losses, financial losses, those are going to, you know, accelerate any types of issues that people have. On the payer side, we're seeing this move away from fee for service on the reimbursement side. And you're seeing more money put into capitated payment plans, population health. And because of that, because you have different payers and providers coming in and taking on risk, you're seeing wellness programs, like you mentioned, Marty, you know, with the mayor putting in place for the city wellness programs. A lot of self-insured providers, our self-insured employers are doing the same thing. There's a benefit. We're not just talking about preventative care anymore or treating symptoms or treating diseases or issues. We're working on preventative medicine and wellness. And I think that holistic approach you're going to see more and more as we switch to these different payment models.
I would agree with what's been said. And Sam, I think you highlight something really important here. So I think the pandemic has uncovered all of these places where there are weaknesses in our system, right? So telehealth is one. We've needed that for a long time. The colleges are all in crisis around mental health issues for their students. mean, if the pandemic has done one thing, it's brought up uncertainty. And people don't like to live in uncertainty. And as a result of that, the mental health issues have been really, really rampant. And the colleges are seeing 2 to 3 times more need for services in the mental health area. So that's its own issue. And then there's all of the supply chain stuff, right? There's like a lot of supply chain issues that the pandemic uncovered, whether that's personal protection equipment or whether it's the need to get care to people quickly and in-person visits were not possible. So the telehealth. And I mean, I've told this story. I was in Qatar late February, early March. It was coming here. We knew that. It had spread from China. It was in Qatar. I told my people we're in clinical trials. I said, you've got to send the kids their medication for 6 months. And they're like, why? And I said, because we don't know what this is going to look like. Right? So today, like as we're manufacturing our drug and thinking about launch quantities, every step takes 2 to 3 or 4 times longer because of the protocols in the labs. So we send a sample out to be tested. It takes that much longer. What took 2 weeks takes 6 now. So everything's slowed down. There's a great need in the supply chain, in what goes on. We have very, decentralized medicine in this country. We don't have a place where you could aggregate people like they do in Europe. So we've had struggles with identifying people, tracing them. There's all kinds of issues that the pandemic, I think, has uncovered in the healthcare field.
Thanks, Joan. And that was a good segue to my next question. And I'm going to open this up to all of the panelists, whoever would like to speak, and perhaps Linda or somebody who hasn't spoken. What other areas or opportunities are showing up in healthcare? You're Linda muted.
Yeah.
You're muted, Linda. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I think it really does going on from COVID with, for example, telehealth. We know that just has been raised here, telehealth is a delivery mechanism that's needed, and now we're moving into mental health, and I think that's wonderful, but I think telehealth is moving into specialized medicine and even precision medicine, whereas to date, telehealth has been kind of a vehicle for primary care or acute type of conditions. I've got an earache, I need prescription, whatever. But moving into chronic conditions, not only for the benefit of patients, or maybe a combination of the benefit of patients and providers, because in terms of specialties, there's just not enough of them to go around. And I can speak specifically to gastroenterology and pancreatitis, and there are just not nearly enough people who understand pancreatitis or gastroenterologists with that degree of specialty that are available to patients. So most patients end up going to 7 providers before they finally get an accurate diagnosis and a treatment plan. And so telemedicine gives the opportunity to have those specialists available to consult with the local GI, with your own GI that's treating the person, and giving the patient the opportunity to move on to getting better care right where they live and where they need it.
Can I also bring up just one aspect to that telehealth, which is that there are cities where some diseases happen more than others, right? So a long time ago, before I went to Wharton, I was actually an actuary in healthcare, and we used to study, morbidity and mortality all the time. And there's actually what they call like the cancer belt, which was like an L from New Hampshire down to Philadelphia, then through Pittsburgh in Ohio. And those are all the old manufacturing cities. But if you look at where all the cancer specialists are, they're probably concentrated in New York City and Boston, where the great hospitals are, right? And universities. So telehealth actually allows you to get to those experts in a way you couldn't before, right?
Fully agree.
Well, and to your point, Marty, I think there's other areas where we're seeing changes in healthcare with telehealth, and we actually do have I have some friends here with the company I've consulted with some their own listening. So I know they're really happy to hear this about telehealth. But then another area with the company I'm working with is around remote patient monitoring, which allows us to come in with chronic diseases and do some other things. So I think that's a growing area, and we don't really fully understand where that's going to go. Any other
finding, by the way, is that we're finding a lot more pricing arbitrage. So doctors who are in less expensive locations can deliver services to people who are in more expensive locations. And then there's like a whole mental health quandary, especially in these large cities where the cost of therapists is so expensive. And we've seen more than half a dozen entrepreneurial ventures come out that are trying to deliver therapy sessions to people in New York City from doctors who are located in Kansas, for example. So.
Yeah, thank you. There's been a big call for transparency across the U.S., especially with COVID, whether it's political or healthcare or what have you. I know there's some models coming out of transparency as well, especially on the reimbursement side. Does anyone have any comment on transparency in healthcare or life sciences? Sam, can you add any clarity on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing a lot more. Well, in general, let's talk about transparency a few different ways. I think you're seeing with clinical trials, and some of you on the pharma side can probably speak to this even more than I can. We're seeing necessarily transparency in that, but also in conflicts of interest. Right, we've got, these laws aren't necessarily new, but from the legal side, we're seeing transparency as far as who are your investors, who are your supporters. And then we also have some new federal regulations that are going to come out that, have come out. We're waiting for the rules to be finalized that are going to have disclosures up the chain for investors to make sure, that different investors, particularly foreign investors, can be monitored. So I think you're going to see, transparency. I know that's kind of a broad term in several different senses, but you're seeing a lot of, I don't know that the regulations are increasing as much as they're being enforced more. We are seeing, again, some new legislation, some new regulations coming down, but I think the conflicts of interest and ownership and, where's the money coming from, who's really involved, there's really been a focus on that.
Yeah. And when do you anticipate this legislation coming through?
The legislation has been approved. We are waiting for regulations coming down. So it's going to create some issues for up the chain reporting as far as PE, VC firms, where typically we did not have to do that. And so we're all kind of sitting here in legal world going, okay, so and it's going to be, I say retroactive to the point of, companies that were formed that may not have had to collect information on their investors and report them are now going to have to start looking at ways to do that. So yeah, even here at Gunster, we're sitting here going, all right, how are we going to reach out to all of our clients and make sure everybody's aware and make sure this starts happening?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So let's turn our focus to the family office.
Can I just jump in one more time here?
Sure.
I just want to give like a real life arbitrage opportunity on this healthcare pricing and telemedicine, which is that there's a firm out in San Francisco which offers psychiatric care at halfway houses. And so I think that the cost at San Francisco or California in general is about $250 to $300 a night for a halfway house for like a bed. And so these guys are able to pull it off for about $160 a night because they're using psychiatric telemedicine from people who are not in California. And so that arbitrage on pricing is so substantial that they're saving about $80 to $90 per bed. So they've got a high-level nurse who's on site, but all the doctoring is done remotely. So just another example of these pricing arbitrages.
Thank you. So let's turn our focus a little bit to the family offices and investing in the investing for the family office, I guess. What approach do you suggest for the family offices to get involved with the life sciences or the healthcare companies that we're talking about? I'll open it up to the panel.
Well, I'd like to jump in here and
Sure,
talk
Linda.
about opportunities at the level of disease or platform, as Sinclair had talked about, opportunities. So it's very complicated and expensive jump into healthcare sort of at a big picture level, or you feel like you may have missed out and everybody can buy stock of the big pharma companies, but where are the real entry points that have great upside? And I think in the smaller disease space or combinations of diseases where, and yes, probably working with a fund manager or an organization such as ours, where we look at a broad spectrum of therapies and approaches. So we're building a portfolio of many different approaches to address not only the disease itself, but the symptoms of the disease. And many of these can go on to other diseases as well. So we're doing all the sort of heavy lifting, finding the good opportunities early on, as was brought up earlier. Sinclair, you talked about getting in early with the academics. We work with the tech transfer offices at universities and start to get the IP in place and royalty agreements while it's still in the lab. So very early on, and then funding that to move it forward, and then finding the upside potential, looking for early exits for licensing opportunities or pure exits or collaboration opportunities or co-investing. So there's a lot of opportunities, but I think aligning with either a disease or a condition or a group of them that you have some either personal interest or just want to be part of a new paradigm for how we treat and cure diseases and fund treating and curing diseases. There's a lot of opportunities in that space, and really encourage the family office folks that are here and individual investors to explore some of those opportunities.
Thank you, Linda. And Joan, what can you add to that for in autism?
Well, I agree. I think, working in a space where there's been no venture capital at all in autism, we have had to access family offices and have been funded by a couple of hedge funds, PE groups, and family offices. And I think I would agree with Linda. I think that the family offices could never do the diligence that the VCs or the other PE people could do. So finding something that aligns with what your interests are, what you could be passionate about, and understanding that, it's also about the CEO. It's about the founder. It's about the person. How much trust do you have in that person? How do they operate? What is their, if not a track record, then what have they done? And in spaces like pancreatitis, which I'm very familiar with, it's not, people aren't looking there. They're not looking at the pancreas. Pancreas is probably the nidus of more disease than we actually really even know, because it's one of the first things to become de-innervated in, for example, in Parkinson's. But people aren't talking about that, right? So there's a lot of science out there that people just ignore. They're like, okay, let's grab this. And, the regulatory space for this is, easier. And there's, that's an orphan drug. Let's go there. But you have to find a space that you're passionate about, that you understand that there's a real need. So it's a win-win for you, right? If you're a family office and you're looking just for money returns, that's one thing. But if you're looking also to have impact, that's a whole other thing.
That's a great point, Joan. Thank you for bringing that up. And I appreciate that you brought up the management team also. We talked about that last month a good deal. Sinclair, you want to discuss briefly the importance of the management team for your investments, and slant it a little bit, if you would, to the private offices. Gennaro, welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I was on the wrong room.
Joan just made a really good point about the importance of the individual, just on the diversification point as well. I agree completely with Linda and Joan that if you're going to do a disease-specific investment, you need to make sure you have the best experts in that vertical that know that disease, know that indication. So if you're going to do a pancreatitis deal, you go to Linda, and Linda knows everyone in that space. If you're going to do something in autism, you go to Joan, and Joan will walk a family office through. But there is a case for doing a more diversified approach, because we have some family office LPs that have backed a single deal in early stage drug development, and it hasn't gone to plan, typically because of those binary outcomes that can come in a regulatory context. So we have family offices that have, LPs that have tried direct single shot on goal, one deal investments, and it hasn't gone to plan. and they've been convinced of the merits of working with us purely because we have a portfolio approach. And we, as I say, in oncology, we have a lot of investments, but we have a lot of other disease covered too across the portfolio, so that you've somewhat, some degree of risk diversification there. On management, you want one of two things. You want, as Joan alluded to, you want an entrepreneur who's deeply passionate. He or she knows the space inside out. They might have had a 20-year academic career understanding the disease and everything mechanistically underlying the cause of the disease. You want that depth of expertise, ideally combined with a serial entrepreneur that has built companies in the past. So there's a 1-2 here. You want a management team that has the best academic founders in the world, but you also want, alongside him or her, you want an entrepreneur that knows how to build a drug development company or knows how to build a medtech company. And there are challenges in transitioning, because you do typically need to make that transition, because the academic founder is not the individual who's going to take a company public.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There are some challenges there. We occasionally find an academic founder that does not want to let go of their baby. They're just not going to give it up. And we have, on occasion, we've said no to a deal, no matter how compelling the science, because the individual academic founder is never going to give it up and take a team-based approach where once you're on the other side of that seed investment check or Series A round of financing, this idea that you're then all on the same team, you're all pulling together, that occasionally you sometimes can't get past that bump in the road. So you need both. You need both. You need the academic expertise and the serial entrepreneur.
I've certainly seen that as well, and working with early stage companies in the life science area for many, many years, even in the pharmaceutical industry. And quite often they hold on to their science, and while they're very bright and very intelligent, it's the one thing that's going to hold them from developing a business model around that. We want to welcome Gennaro D'Urso. He's with Genetic Networks. A little late joining us, but certainly we're glad he's here and he's on the panel. So I'm going to throw it out to you, Gennaro. We're talking about opportunities for family offices investing. How can a family office or any investor get interested in genetics or genomics, which I'm in?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'm sorry for being late. I was on another room, which I had no access to the folks. I had the wrong link, so glad to be here. Yeah, so I'm chairman and CEO of Genetic Networks. I've been listening into all your conversations during this period, so I'm up to speed. And I just wanted to comment a little bit on what Linda and Sinclair have been talking about. I think it's really exciting that COVID was one of these things that happened once in 100 years, but what I think really generated was a lot of interest in the idea of how we can repurpose medications that are already out there, available and safe, and how they could be used for other applications. And I think that's never been a strong focus of the pharmaceutical industry. However, I think this has really shed light on this problem that we probably have a lot of drugs that would work under certain circumstances in other diseases. And like at our company, we showed that a drug that was in a phase 3 holding pattern was actually available for COVID-19. But that's just an example of how new platform development can accelerate this repurposing or retracking of molecules. And I think this is sort of a big need in the community, in the world really, and it really has not been addressed very much over the years, largely because of the drive for single target, single drug, single application. So I think one of the things to consider when looking at these early opportunities is to see the availability of platforms that can do these kind of things. And I think they are starting to come up, and we're really sort of being exercised during the COVID-19 pandemic as an example, but not necessarily as the only application where it could be used. So we mentioned things like Parkinson's and autism, et cetera. And our approach has always been to try to find the drugs that are actually out there ready to go, how they can be reformulated into a new molecule, which is a new patent, to be applied to these diseases that are really, in some cases, very much neglected. As Linda was pointing out, some of these rare diseases that obviously are a big concern for some people, but big pharma is never going to really pursue these avidly because the markets are just not big enough. We have applications now that could maybe make it profitable for a smaller company to capitalize on those discoveries. So as a family office looking at things where maybe there's an interest in a specific disease, rare disease or otherwise, a company like ours or other companies similar to ours offer an opportunity to really explore a space that may not really get the attention. And that's something we're really actively pursuing and being broad-minded about it. So not being singularly focused on one disease, but using a platform that can actually apply the technology to multiple diseases. And I think that's an opportunity that's just sitting there waiting to be exploited. And I used to be an academic, I've been running my company, but absolutely don't fall in that category of saying my science is all mine, I want to keep it to myself. If I found the right team, which put together a team of business experts, which I have now in my company, like folks like some of you know, Don Jones, et cetera, we can build that team, but we certainly need help and resources to do that. So anyone's interested in that kind of concept, I'm more than happy to talk to them.
Gennaro, I'm very interested in that concept. That's what I do. I want to turn our focus to Joan and Linda a little bit, and in really two areas, and a great segue from what you commented on at the end. And one would be, how can your platform be used in other models, Joan? And then secondly, what about exits? I mean, there's a number of different ways to exit. What are some of the exits you're considering for your organizations?
So I could not agree with Gennaro more. It's exactly what we did. We repurposed something that was existing, reformulated it, and we have a patent portfolio of over 300 patents, and see it used for multiple areas in different formulations, where there's a single issue that we see the thread that runs through them. So diseases are usually siloed into GI and neuro and psychiatric and all of that, but there are other threads that run through them across ways, and people don't look at drug development that way, right? It's not, the FDA isn't even organized that way, right? So in order to, what we did, we saw the thread through a whole bunch of things, and so for example, it turns out that what we do, we're not big, although we've got a lot of big indications and things that we're working on. One of the things that we worked on that we have a terrific patent on is a Parkinson's remote monitoring system. We happen to have that expertise in-house. We got some more expertise, and we got a patent on a remote monitoring system, mostly to do clinical trials, not necessarily to make it a remote monitoring system. However, now it's getting a lot of attention because it's what you need to do when you've got patients who are living remotely, away from their doctors, or have a disease that's progressed to a point where they can't get in to see a doctor. So this thing, they can do constant monitoring of their condition on all of the, the Parkinson's areas. So I think that repurposed drugs are not sexy. They're not, novel, they're not this, but they have a really big purpose. And that technology, the safety is already established in many cases. So they're imminently usable if people have some imagination and understand the real science behind them.
Any comment on exits, Joan, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so I always say, because I'm a pediatric developmental person, I know that when a child develops all their domains across all their domains equally, their prognosis is good. Whereas if a child lags behind in one area, their prognosis will not be as good. So that's how I brought up our company. I brought up a company to make sure that the clinicals were as good as the IP, was as good as all the different pieces that we have. So we can actually go in any direction, right? So we're exploring now whether we would do a SPAC or whether we would actually do a full IPO. And we've been getting ready for that for a while now. So we just have to make a decision about, what's right for us and who the people are. Again, it's people, right? So if it was a SPAC, it had to be the right people and the right opportunity, because, autism is a big market. There's a lot, we started this not thinking about markets, but now there's, autism is global. And so, how do we get this to the kids? Because that's what we have been focused on, is bringing, value to the investors, as well as getting this drug to the kids. And those are the two pieces that guide everything we do.
Thank you, Joan. And Linda, your perspective on platform and exits, and then, to both of you, since we talked about mental health and substance abuse earlier, or either of your models, would they work in substance abuse or mental health, which are core issues for the U.S.?
First of all, on the platform, I couldn't agree with Joan more. So looking at diseases across different conditions and finding the commonalities. And so the way we look at it is not just pancreatitis, but also things like inflammation, fibrosis, pain, and mental health is actually one of our areas as well. And of course, each of those areas in terms of research and development and product development cross over to many other different diseases. And in the disease itself, our real focus is on genetics. Most people don't realize, but pancreatitis is a genetically driven disease. About 50% of the people who have had genetic testing have a CFTR mutation, which is the same gene that causes cystic fibrosis. Now, everybody's heard of cystic fibrosis and nobody's heard of chronic pancreatitis. And the market's about 10-fold larger in pancreatitis.
What is the
with
market
some
for
very commonalities
pancreatitis?
in terms of genetics. Pardon me?
Excuse me for interrupting, Linda. What is the market for pancreatitis?
In terms of population?
Population or dollar
Yeah.
size, either one.
Yeah, so there's about 700,000 people with recurrent acute and chronic pancreatitis. Recurrent acute is kind of the predecessor to chronic, and about 35,000 of those 700,000 are children, and that's the US alone. There's millions worldwide. So a really good size opportunity. And I think in terms of looking at exits, the thing we look at is more so timing than anything. We are an accelerator. We are impatient and not interested in academic timelines or even pharma drug development pipelines. It all takes too long, and these patients are suffering, and they've been waiting and waiting and waiting. And so our whole approach is to start with how quickly can we exit, or how quickly can we get a liquidity event and get some return to our investors, reinvest to do more, to get better therapies in the hands and arms of people who need them. And some of those things are definitely the things that have been brought up here. Repurposing drug is key part of our strategy. Innovative trial design is another one. And again, COVID has really helped move some of that along, but even more so, we look at, let's be, we call it just kind of down and dirty trial design. What's the fewest number of patients with the least amount of time to actually be able to prove what we're trying to prove? And of course, especially if we're looking at either repurposed drugs or drugs that are phase 2 ready, they've already got the safety and tox screens of it, and so we can move at a much quicker pace. And that has a lot to do with our exits, be it licensing or co-development or complete exit. So as far as we're concerned, sooner is better. Most things in 3 years or less.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joan, the market size of autism, someone just asked about that.
So it's 1% of the total world population.
Okay, very good. And I'm going to ask you another question that one of our listeners asked, or observers.
Yeah.
Does your company focus on reaching just the drugs on autism, or even therapeutic solutions?
Therapeutic solutions meaning other drugs?
That's kind of vague to me. I'm not sure what that means either.
I think the question might have been about CNS more broadly, Joan, like other diseases, not just.
Yeah. So, we have, I look at this a little bit like when Amgen did EPO. We went after the most difficult market. They went after dialysis patients, right? And so we went after looking at kids with autism. That was our focus. But in the process of developing that drug, we learned a lot about it. And so we have, as I said, we have indications for Parkinson's, for schizophrenia, which is 5% of the world's population, believe it or not. And autism used to be called childhood schizophrenia. We've used, a version of our drug in a mouse model for schizophrenia and had amazing results, as well as a mouse model for ADHD. So we have those things that we've looked at. So we know that there's multiple, multi-purposed pieces, and so our plan is, as we're getting this ready, is to go into a small phase 2 for schizophrenia to start with.
Thank you, Joan. I want to ask the panelists another question, and then I want to come back to exits with you, Sam. And another question from the audience is, how do the fund managers on the panel manage risk versus return, especially in the early stage of investing, perhaps in the seed rounds?
I'm happy to have a quick stab at that, Al. I think back to diversification, you have, and this relates to the platform point earlier, you can have a fundamental scientific breakthrough or innovation that, for example, could be the underlying cause of inflammation, giving you new disease targets. And as you all know, inflammation drives many diseases, including most forms of cancer, as Gennaro and others have much more expertise in this than I do. If you can understand the underlying cause of something like inflammation, that could give you multiple shots on goal. So you can have that form of diversification inside a single portfolio company or even a single drug candidate. But I think diversification, if you're going early, which is obviously the highest risk part of the drug development or medical device development cycle, you have to have diversification across mechanisms, modalities, and disease targets. And that's something that we certainly approach. And repurposed drugs, just to circle back to that for a second, could very much be part of that. There is a bias, maybe misplaced, maybe unfair in the venture community, that there is occasionally an IP challenge, intellectual property issue around repurposing. VCs tend to not always think that originally. There's a lot of lemming-like herd mentality. There are fashions and trends in the venture community that are sometimes a disservice to innovators, and it's all about being in the right place at the right time. But diversification is the slightly simplistic answer to tackling it at the early stages, and that's something we do with a diversification of sources. We work with many different schools, many different research centers, and we also do homegrown ideas where we will landscape the scientific literature for something that's fundamentally novel, and then build a company from scratch around it, which is something that individual family offices would struggle to do unless they were working with a specialist manager.
And let me just point out to our listeners that if you don't know Sinclair, look at their website. You might want to put that in the chat there, and you will see that they do diversification really, really well. They certainly understand diversification. Sam, from your perspective, I want to touch back on exits from a legal perspective, which we didn't really talk about that much. And then perhaps a little bit, if you will, on the early stage investing and how your clients might participate.
Sure. Well, so exit strategies are sometimes forced in my world. I call them, there's the planned ones that you want that end up with good results, an acquisition or sale. And I think who the ultimate buyer is really changing right now in healthcare, at least from my perspective. I deal with a lot of providers who consolidate, put together, and then are either looking for some type of PE investment, or they're going to consolidate with some big national company. Or what's been really interesting right now is payers. Payers are expanding into becoming service providers. And, where it used to be, as we were starting these businesses and saying, okay, where is this going to go? It used to be, oh, I want to get, PE investment or VC investment. And now it's, gosh, maybe our ultimate buyer is the payer. And I think in every industry we've been talking about, whether it's medical devices, remote monitoring, pharmaceuticals, to get into healthcare, you really have to, and this is probably with any investment, right? You've got to follow the money and understand what drives the market. And a lot of times, like with new devices, I can tell you, I work with clients on getting FDA approval. And the biggest issue is, what will Medicare pay for? Yes, I can get this device approved. Yes, it can do this, but am I going to ultimately get paid for it? And it's really hard to attract investors if the answer to that question is no, Medicare doesn't have a code for that yet. No, it's not approved, or it's off-label use. And so nobody wants to really invest. So getting in the market, I think there's understanding that now, again, going away from this fee for service where it's cha-ching every time we run, a code through to bill Medicare or a payer. And a lot of payers are following suit. We're going to different reimbursement models. And so with population health, risk adjustment, looking at how we manage care, back to Marty's point early about wellness programs. It's now about cost savings, taking a per member per month fee and managing it. And I think that's how insurance companies, I think Medicare, you're going to see more of that in managed care. And so having the ability to get in somewhere and in an early entry point. So this goes, I guess, to entrance and exit. I'd say, take a chance on some of those things that may not be reimbursable now, but is a great diagnostic tool, or is shown, some of these drugs is shown to actually be effective, because in the long run, this is where the payment models are going. If we can save money in the long run, make people healthy, manage these conditions, get people healthier, it's going to save money, which now makes money. A penny saved is now a penny earned in healthcare. And as far as exit strategies, really, I think the highlight, at least in my practice, has been the payers becoming the ultimate buyer.
Nice. You almost had a theme there, do more with less. It's been going around for a while, right? Yes. So let's see, where to go next? What about the family offices? How do they get involved? Sinclair, you touched on this a little bit earlier. You want to touch that one, and Gennaro will be used to answer that one as well.
Yeah, briefly, we're very fortunate to have a number of family offices as LPs in both our earlier funds and the current fund, and they are West, East Coast, Midwest, from several different states. They have different motivations, as Joan and Linda mentioned earlier. Some are motivated by impact, some are motivated by seeking exposure to the sector at an early stage because exits are happening earlier, but they want the diversification that a specialist manager can bring. So hopefully we present as a partner a way to de-risk. We also prioritize co-invest for our family office LPs. So if we seed a company and there's room in the seed or Series A round, we'll make sure that those family office LPs can come in alongside the funds check. So we're privileged to work with a number of different family offices that are in some cases located in the Baltimores, the Phillies, the Texas, the Florida, not Boston necessarily, and not Northern California necessarily. So there's our approach to what we call emerging hubs or underventured regions. That seems to appeal to a number of our family office investors. So we also have some international family office investors as well. We have a big family office out of Hong Kong that is very motivated by health and wellness, not necessarily IRR, but obviously our overriding fiduciary is to maximize returns to our LPs. So I would say this, you could argue, but I would say family offices may want to think about working with a specialist manager to get diversified exposure to the sector.
Yeah, and Sinclair, as well as all the panelists, if you haven't already put your contact information in the chat, please do so. We have about 5 minutes, and I'll just ask our audience if they have any questions, please use the chat or the Q&A in front of you so we can ask the panelists. With 5 minutes, I'd like to go to Gennaro, Joan, and Linda. Will you just briefly tell us where you are with your organization and what you're seeking?
Fantastic. Thanks, Yvonne. So one point I just wanted to make, we talked a lot about repurposing drugs, and clearly there's been a bias against that over the years. And the reason for that is quite simple. I've learned this from working with pharma. There's no way to actually do it very effectively. And so what we at our company and others have attempted, but I think we've succeeded this year in proving, is that we have a platform that can actually do that process. It's not just guessing. It's actually looking at how drugs like Joan was talking about, that look very promising in the disease and we're taking it to phase 2, we could actually analyze that drug in a very high resolution manner and figure out what other drugs available out there in the world might actually work to improve the efficacy of that drug. And the other key thing I learned recently, which is really interesting and people don't really appreciate, most big pharmas don't innovate anymore. That may not come to a big surprise for most of you, but what they do is they basically remodel the chemistry. So any drug we find repurposable, we found one recently actually that we're trying to now out-license from a major pharma. The point is, even if they don't want to do it for reasons that only pharma can understand, we can literally take that drug like they do and modify it in 3 moieties and change it into a drug that can now be repatented. The other way to do that is reformulation. So there's great opportunities out there with a platform that can predict what drugs can do outside of the intended area where they were first initially made. And so our approach has been taking advantage of that. And this year was successful, at least in COVID-19, but we believe it's addressable to almost any disease out there.
Thank
So
you,
I would,
Gennaro.
I would expect that maybe people can reach out, learn more about those kind of things, and maybe be involved.
Thank you. Linda, quickly, please. We got about 2 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Well, Mission Cure Capital was founded about 2 years ago. We've raised $3 million to date, and we've made 3 investments totaling about $700,000. We will start to see our first royalty streams in 2022. We're off to a promising start, but there's many more opportunities and work to be done. So we're seeking $50 million to allow us to grow our team, invest in more projects, invest in more technology, and develop therapeutic assets that will allow us to take them from discovery to the clinic. And so contact me on my website or through this chat. I've put my information, and I'm happy to give more information.
All right, there's a poll that just popped up. Joan, quickly, please.
Yes, so we are in the process of exploring our exit and as well as raising capital. So we have a small, bridge round now to a crossover round that we're doing. We're also talking to crossover people at the same time. It's a platform, as I said, we have indications for Parkinson's, schizophrenia, the autism piece, as well as cocaine addiction, for example. So there's a lot of pieces that run through those things. And I put my name in there and our website as well. You can contact me if you have any interest or any comments on what was said today.
Thank you, Joan. I appreciate it. And Sam, closing thoughts. You've got 1 minute. I could make a joke about that, right? An attorney with 1 minute. I'm just saying.
Nothing to say. No. Your jokes.
No attorney jokes today, please.
No, really, I think there's a lot of opportunities. Technology, one point we didn't focus on was data and data mining and data collection, but again, it goes to that wellness and population health. So I think those are going to be really some areas to focus on.
Yeah, and we didn't even talk about artificial intelligence either, and there's a lot going on there. So certainly some topics to follow up on, and I'm well aware of some of those models. It's the two. Sinclair, closing thought.
We would love to hear from any family offices that are interested in looking at the early stage life science space. We have an amazing pipeline of research-driven, disease-curing opportunities that we could give exposure to if anyone's interested in learning more. And those run across the whole country. We're very excited. We'll announce our first Florida-based deal in about 2 weeks. So watch this space.
We'll be looking for that. Thank you all to my panelists. I've had the opportunity to get to know all of you, and you're just excellent at what you do. You're the best of the best, and it's humbling to be able to moderate a group like you. So thank you.